everyone, it's bun time. In this video, I'll be setting up my project journal for all of my knitting projects. I'm working in an A5 size dot grid journal by Archer and Olive with 160 GSM paper and 160 pages. If you want the same notebook I'm using, I'll put a link to it and all of the supplies I used in this video in the description box. The first spread I'm setting up is the journal cover. I sketched out some hands knitting a piece of fabric and I'm tracing over it with my gold gel pen. I originally wanted to do a scrapbooky style journal, but then I remembered you have to have a color printer to print out pictures before you can paste those pictures into your journal. I had also ordered the Neapolitan notepad from Archer and Olive, but I accidentally ordered the B5 size instead of the A5 size, so I tried to exchange it, but they sent me some other random journal instead, so I just kind of gave up on that dream. I put down some masking fluid because I thought I was going to do some kind of star pattern on the knitting fabric, but I'm not sure it was successful, and I'm using my gold watercolors to color it all in. This paper isn't really for watercolors, so the paper will buckle just a little bit, but if you don't use a whole lot of water, you at least won't get any bleed through. Also, I apologize for my earbuds cable. I'm not cool enough to be sponsored by Raycon yet, so I'm working with corded earbuds for now, and they are in the shot occasionally because I'm listening to music while I'm filming this. So with the watercolors, I'm working up the layers slowly, letting each layer dry completely before adding a new layer. This watercolor goes on pretty streaky at first, but if you do it in a couple layers, it looks really nice. And I used that same watercolor and that same paintbrush to do most of the lettering in this setup. After all of the watercolor had completely dried, I very carefully rubbed off the masking fluid. The white spaces don't really look like stars like I wanted, they just kind of look like moth holes, but I guess that's fine. The next spread I'm setting up is an index. I don't normally use an index, but since this is my first time setting up a project journal, I thought it might be helpful in case I come up with any reference spreads in the middle of the journal so I can find it easily. I'm using my gold watercolors and my watercolor brush to do the lettering again. I think I do that for most of the spreads in this setup. I thought the spread looked a little plain, so I added some more gold watercolor to the bottom half of the spread. So most of the spreads I'm setting up here are not knitting specific, so if you're not doing a knitting journal, you can easily repurpose the spreads for whatever you want. Next up is my knit list, which is essentially the same spread I set up in my 2021 bullet journal setup, but that spread is already almost full, so I did a double page spread and I'll just migrate everything over later. My knit list is basically just a list of knitting projects that I want to do. I have a section for the pattern name, the pattern author, and the person I'm knitting it for. Then I added in the gold watercolor for the headers and for the decoration at the bottom of the spread. I really loved how the gold lettering looks in this whole setup. The next spread I'm setting up is my knitting goals spread. I have a lot of projects that I want to do eventually, but I have 6 projects that I want to prioritize. So I'm drawing a box for each project where I can add in some basic info like when I started the project, when I finished, what yarn I want to use, and who it's for. I of course used the gold watercolor to do the lettering at the top. And then I taped off the area that I wanted to paint gold. I kept getting impatient here and it ended up taking probably twice as long as it needed to because I kept having to go over the same spot, but we got there eventually. You really can't put another layer on top of a layer that's still kind of wet with the watercolors, but you can't teach me apparently because I kept doing it. Especially since these watercolors just kind of sit on the page instead of soaking into the page. With this kind of paper. Next is my project photos spread. I'm setting aside 4 pages for photos. I don't actually know how many projects I'm going to finish while I'm working in this journal, or how long this journal will last me, but I guess if I end up doing more than 16 projects, I can add in a fold-out page and put more photos in that way. I'm using this photo of my lovely cat to trace out the space needed for each photo, and I'll be printing out photos of each project using my old Fujifilm Instax film printer. I used a very simple cursive font for the headers, and of course I had to add in a splash of gold to both spreads. And the last spread I'm setting up is the cover for the first project in this journal. I have this photo of the yarn I'll be using, and I left a space for the photo of the finished project on the right side so you can see the before and after of the yarn becoming a sweater. I'm also going to write in some details such as the name of the pattern, the author, the knitting needles I used, and the start date and the finish date. And I'm using a Tombow dual brush pen to letter in the title of the project, which is also just the knitting pattern name. Then I used some black washi tape to tape in the yarn labels for the yarn I'm using. It's a good idea to hold on to your yarn labels so you always have the care instructions, and so you have the dye lot of your yarn, so if you need to buy more, you know what lot to request if possible. I had to order more yarn for a sweater I knit last year, and the dye lot was completely different, and it was really noticeable, and it looked really bad. So rule of thumb for knitting, order enough yarn for your project. Or if you already messed that up, try and get the same dye lot. So anyway, the whole left side is going to be all about yarn details. And I also added a small piece of both yarns that I'm using, and I'm going to write in how much yarn that I used for the project, and how much yarn the project calls for, so I can compare and see if there's a difference. After the cover page, I actually already wrote in the knitting pattern I'm working on. The whole reason I'm setting up a knitting journal is because I like having the pattern written out in front of me on physical paper that I can write on and keep track of rows, decreases, and stuff like that. And I also love spaces for some progress photos and some space to write in notes in case I alter the pattern. So here's the final flip through. I really hope you like this setup, and if you're also keeping a project journal, please leave me a comment and let me know what are some essential spreads that you're using in your project journal in case I want to steal them. And thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.